I'm Caroline. I'm 24 years old. I went to Fulshear when I was just turned 21. So it's been about, since leaving Fulshear, it's been about 2.5 years. I was at Fulshear for about a year. Prior to Fulshear, my life was pretty rough. I started really struggling when I was about 17, 18 years old, to the point of going into inpatient mental health facilities almost every month for self-harming, suicide attempts. I attended a couple of different residential treatment programs prior to going to Fulshear. Those were shorter, probably about 2 or 3 months. I was diagnosed with pretty much anything under the sun, from OCD to bipolar depression to borderline, just pretty much everything. I was put on so many different medications, I can't even remember all of them. Therapy appointments, psychiatric appointments, psychiatrist appointments. I mean, it was crazy. It was my whole life was my mental health. I think the darkest time was right before I attended residential treatment at another facility that sent me to Fulshear. I was like 20 years old, living with my parents, trying to go to college, but pretty much missing class regularly. And I was living with them, and my mom was driving around in her Mini Cooper, and she had all of the knives in our house, all of my dad's razors, all of the medication that we've had in the house locked in the back trunk of her Mini Cooper. And I always thought, like, if a police officer pulled her over, they'd be like, "What the heck? Like, what do you have in your trunk?" But it was all just my parents trying to keep me safe and not knowing how. Therapists told them that they needed to take away things to make sure I didn't hurt myself or kill myself. It was a pretty dark time. Right before I went into residential treatment, I was put in inpatient for a suicide attempt. It was probably the most serious one that I had had. And this doctor pulled my mom and me into her office, the lead psychiatrist actually at the facility. She pulled us in and she told my mom to expect that I would have to live with them for the rest of my life, that I would be in and out of inpatient for the rest of my life, that this really wouldn't get any better. It was devastating. I started sobbing. And my mom pulled me out of the room. She was really upset too. And it's funny, I don't remember a lot from back then, whether it's just having a lot of anxiety or being on so many medications that I just don't have a good memory of it. But I distinctly remember this moment of my mom pulling me out and telling me, "Don't listen to that lady. She doesn't know what she's talking about. We're going to figure this out." And although it was nice to hear my mom say those words, I was pretty much completely out of hope, because this person, who was obviously really good at their job, if they were the lead psychiatrist, told me that there was no hope. It was a really dark time for sure. I entered into residential treatment where I was there, and I was in Wisconsin at that time. I entered into residential treatment. The same place I had been at. It was like my third time there. And the previous time, I remember there's so many different things they try to do to fix me. There's the, I forget what it's called, transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, where I had to sit. It was like I was in this horror movie. I was sat on a machine and they hooked stuff up to my head. And it really wasn't that scary. I mean, it was just a magnet tapping my head. But like, it's just crazy, all the different stuff I tried before I came to Fulshear. But this next time I came in, and the therapist there was pretty much like, "Okay, obviously this isn't working. This is your third, or possibly it was the fourth time I had been at that facility." And she really talked to me and my parents and said, "We think you need to do something differently." And my parents hired an educational consultant, and he sent it over a bunch of different places. And I remember I was at the residential treatment facility. We had like 30 minutes of computer time, and I would just sit on the computer and look at all these different places. And I was like, man, I don't really want to be in the city. But like, this wasn't in the city. It was in Houston, but it wasn't in Houston. And really what sold me was the fact that there were horses at the ranch. I was like, okay, I'm going to go live on a ranch with horses. That sounds good, I guess. And the idea was that I was going to be, since I had already been in residential treatment, that we were like, oh, I'll only be there for like a couple months in Texas, which, spoiler alert, did not happen, but it's the best thing. But right after Christmas, my dad came and packed me up in Wisconsin, and I came with 2 duffel bags and got on a plane and flew to Texas. And the drive from the airport to the ranch was terrifying. I was like in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, what have I gotten myself into? And it's kind of funny about Needville is it looks like, there's not a lot going on. There's, all this different farmland, and we pulled into the ranch, and it was this beautiful place with this beautiful house and the horses. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be okay. This is nice. I met Helene, and then my dad and I met Helene, and said a very teary goodbye to my dad. I know it was really hard for him to just leave me there. But he left, and I started this journey. And I didn't really know what I was going to be in for. But it was amazing and terrifying and hard all at the same time. And I met Michelle, my therapist. And this was a really big moment too. I was a couple days in at being at Fulshear. And she asked me if I thought I was going to self-harm. And I said, I'm having thoughts of doing it. And she said something, and I'm sure there was more behind this than I realized. But she told me, I trust you not to do it, so I'm not going to take anything away. I mean, there's not anything at the ranch you can seriously hurt yourself with. But I mean, at the time when I came, I was using anything from like DVDs to, you can find anything to self-harm with. But she told me, I trust you not to do it. And it was like mind-blowing. I was like, what do you mean you trust me not to do it? You're not going to lock everything up. You're not going to send me away. And ever since that day, I've never self-harmed. It's been, I was 21, so it's been over 3 years. And that's a lot of what I learned at Fulshear is that I'm in control. And I'm not in control of everything, obviously, but I'm in control of my own actions. So I did a lot of intensive therapy and looking back at my life and dealing with some really hard things. And met, the psychiatrist at Fulshear, which I think one of my favorite things was like how little that was to the program. Like she was there, Dr. Clark was there to make sure like medications were okay, but it wasn't the main focus. And I sat down with her the first time, and she said, "Are you psychotic?" And I was like, "No, I've never had a psychotic episode." And she was like, "Why are you on such high doses of antipsychotics then?" And really what it was is I was so depressed and so anxious, and nothing was working, that all the doctors could do was give me more medicine and more medicine, just trying to make me feel better. And all it did was numb me. And that's why I really think there's about 2 years in my life that I just don't even remember from being on so many medications. And she told me something that first day, and she said, "You're not going to be able to work on any trauma or anything that you've been through if you can't feel anything," which was true. And so we started taking away, at least I think the first step is we just cut down the doses of my antipsychotics. And then I came off the antipsychotic, obviously over a period of time. And by the time, about a year later, when I ended up leaving Fulshear, I was on no mental health medications at all, which is something that I never thought would be possible. Nobody thought would be possible. And I'm still not on any mental health medications, which is awesome. I think the coolest thing about Fulshear, and probably what made it so different from other programs, was one, I mean, the therapy in general, I think, was just better for me. I'm sure these other programs work for other people, but it was so intensive that it really got to everything that I struggled with. It really got to all the family issues and the childhood things that had happened that just really kind of messed me up. And we just really dove into all of that. But I think the thing that was so cool, and I think about it because I'm like, why did Fulshear work, when nothing else did? And I think it was the ability for me to live and make and do certain patterns that I had done in the past, while still having like a support system. I almost think of it like a bunch of coaches, like rewatching tape. Like I'm going out and, and I do something and I completely just crash and burn and, stop showing up to programming and, and doing something that in the past would have been really detrimental, like in the real world. But instead of it being really detrimental, I was in this program with all these safety nets, but we'd come back and we'd be like, okay, what happened? You were doing this, this happened, you did this. Like this, and they would go, like, this is what triggered it. And this is kind of what you could have done differently. And it was really just a bunch of coaches sitting with you, going through these hard patterns and then tweaking and then getting up and trying again and falling down again and being like, okay, this is what happened this time. And, I don't know if that makes sense, but that is, I think, what made Fulshear so different is that's what made Fulshear different, is the ability to first have all this time on the ranch and then the transition program, starting to go back into real life and but still having the people there to help when patterns showed up that in the past would have sent me back to treatment. So yeah, I was there for about a year, and then I left Fulshear, and I still had some help. I still saw my therapist and transition specialist for a couple sessions after leaving Fulshear. The transition was kind of tricky, but I got on my feet. I started working, and I think, one thing is leaving Fulshear, there's still mistakes that I've made and hard things that I've been through. But at the end of the day, I have to remind myself that when I came to Fulshear, I wanted to die. I couldn't go 2 months without being hospitalized. So, although I've had my struggles, nothing compares to that. Now I work at an animal shelter. I've had the same job for over 2 years, which is awesome. And I'm following my passion. I help a lot of animals every year, and my desire is to start my own animal nonprofit organization, which I'll do because I can, because I have the tools to do it. And I know that I can do it, which is something that Fulshear gave back to me, was the confidence that I can live the life that I want to live, that I'm capable of doing it, that I'm not going to crash and burn. And And of course I need support and I need people to help me, but I'm not like an incapable person who's going to be, you know, kept down by all of her mental health issues for the rest of her life. I am not living with my parents, with my mom driving around with all the knives and all the medication in the back of her car. I'm not that person. I'm never going to be that person again.